Great. So it's a really great privilege to be joined by David Manheim of the Foresight Foundation and Wendy Sooner. David Manheim works with several universities and research groups. He's currently involved in understanding large-scale risks to humanity in different domains, focusing on biosecurity and AI alignment, working on both issues in public policy and technical research on risk analysis. David is a superforecaster with the Good Judgement Good Judgement Inc. and was one of the original superforecasters in the Good Judgement Project, which we recently read about for our last week on forecasting. I also have the pleasure of working with David at One Day Sooner, which is an organization that advocates on behalf of volunteers for high impact medical research, including COVID-19 human challenge trials. David did a really excellent job putting together this interactive risk model that allows users to compare the risks of taking part in a challenge trial with other common risks like liposuction. Very common. And so, yeah, with all that, I will hand it over to David for a presentation. And after that, we will have a Q&A session. And given that, we're not that many people on the call for the Q&A session, we can just unmute ourselves and ask David questions. So with all that, yep, David, it's all yours.
Okay. So yeah, I do lots of different things. In case anybody didn't get this, I do lots of different things. That's a complicated way of saying that I have ADHD and can't focus on one at a time. But I a lot of really cool things. I strongly advocate for anybody who can to take time to focus on the things that they think would be really interesting and impactful. And I'm very privileged to actually be able to do that. So I can talk about any of those things. I'm going to talk about kind of what superforecasting is a little bit. And then, you should know a bunch of this already. Okay, so forecasting, what is it? It'd be really great if you knew what was going to happen. And we don't, and that's really fundamental. And there are things that we want to know for an EA, from an EA perspective, specifically about what it is that we want to do. And this is really important and something that's getting a lot of focus among EAs because we actually know these things. But we actually want to know these things. But there's also lots of stuff that I think is more applicable to most people that I think I wanted to focus on just because I think that there's this really useful personal piece. And I don't think that people, there are a lot of tools that people have that would be valuable if they use them, and people routinely don't. For a lot of these things, predicting them is at the very least just a way of making sure you ask the question. When you sign up for your classes, do you ever stop to think? Will you like it? Or what grade do you think you're going to get? Or what your other options are? And the answer is a lot of the time, no. You just you're on autopilot, because most of us are on autopilot most of the time. But I think that forecasting at the very least is a way to reflect on some of those things. Okay, so I want everybody to actually do this while I talk about a couple of things. But if you can give a 50% confidence interval and a 100% confidence interval. And that second one is weird, but I want to talk about it once people have done that. You can open up a window with Notepad or something and put it in there. But the types of things that you can forecast are really, really varied. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but some of the things that are varied are interesting in different ways. Some of them are things that you're going to get answers to. Some of them are things that it will be a long time before you get answers to. Some of them are things that you're very unlikely to see the answer to ever. So how many expected qualities will you save with your careers and donations during the 2030s? And the answer is, even if you're really well calibrated and do a great job predicting that, you're not going to get the answer. You're not going to be told oh, so we've done a large scale study to look at, we've elicited answers from 30 experts and their consensus is that you saved 7,000 qualies this decade, and good job. It's never going to happen. The fact that you don't get feedback on it doesn't mean it's not an interesting and useful question. There are other questions that are that you're definitely going to get answers to pretty quickly and are useful for different things. So I want to talk about kind of the basics here, because I think that there's a lot of assumptions about why it is that this is difficult. And it's not actually a just so story. Like this is actually a linguistic difference. In China, they don't say that they're untalented or that they're not good at something. They say that they haven't like invested time, or they haven't worked at doing it. Like that's the difference. So when people in the US will say, "Oh, I'm bad at math," like because intrinsically they're bad at math, as opposed to some kids spend the years between say 3rd grade and 12th grade spending a bunch of time doing math, and some don't. And the ones who do spend a bunch of time doing math end up talented. That's not to say that there's no like fundamental piece there where like some people are better than others, but for forecasting, like most things, most people can be pretty good. So, right, hopefully everybody here knows how to walk, right? Some of you might run sometimes, right? And very few, if any, are on the college track team. So the question is like, well, how valuable is this, and what is it that you want to get done? And the answer is walking is really, really valuable. Everybody wants to be able to do that. Running occasionally is kind of useful if you want to catch the bus. But competing in track and field might not be something that you in particular are going to do, and that's fine. I think forecasting is really the same way. Everybody should get to the point where they're not really bad at this. Fine. So what do you do to get better? So I think the reading material that you looked at probably talked about this some. But I think that it's hard to do this without kind of actual practice, spending time thinking about it. So when you tell somebody, I'm going to roll this die, how likely is it to roll a 2? They're very likely to give you the right answer. If you ask them what the probability is that you have, if you have 2 dies and you roll snake eyes, they will probably be able to give you the right answer there also, assuming they remember their, 4th grade probability. But that's not the same as if you spend a lot of time playing games with dice, actually getting used to how common this is. So there was something that when I worked in reinsurance a long time ago, one of the people said that people have this really difficult time dealing with the fact that like 1 in 100-year events happen much more frequently than they expect them to. And like they're not sure why. So they gave everybody dice in a room, and they gave everybody 3 dice, and they said, okay, roll your 3 dice. How many of you got 3 ones? Right, it's a 1 in 216 chance. And you have 40 people in the room, and like 1 person raised their hand, and the second time you roll them and nobody raised their hand, and the third time nobody raised their hand. First time, like 2 people. You're like, is this like a violation of the laws of probability? And the answer is no. That's exactly what you expect to happen when you have lots of chances for rare events to happen. But most people are surprised by events that they know have some non-negligible chance of happening. The 2016 election is like a really great example of this, because everybody who was forecasting was like, yeah, 20%, 30%, okay, maybe only like a 2% chance of it happening. But none of the well-calibrated forecasts said, yeah, this is like a 1 in a million chance. There were people who said that, but there were also people who don't know what they're doing. calibration training, I think, is straightforward, and you just have to spend time doing it. I will point out, after maybe some of you actually wrote down 50% confidence intervals for those questions before. There's an interesting thing about confidence intervals, which is that they're non-unique. So if I ask you, what's your 50% confidence interval for what this dice roll comes out as, it's perfectly fine to say 1, 2, or 3, or 3, 4, or 5, or right, like any of those is a perfectly valid 50. I mean, obviously, like it's a contrived example, but there are lots of places where your 50% confidence interval, if you look at like, oh, like it's between this value and this value, that's not actually a really useful way of thinking about it. So training to think through like how that works is useful. Deliberate practice. So kind of in increasing order of how much investment you have in this. Forecasting things, and I'll talk a little bit about where you do that, but betting on things is actually really good feedback for like what it is that you really mean when you say like this is likely or unlikely. Like, does it actually happen? People who play poker professionally, there are lots of, and you may or may not know about this, but Raising for Effective Giving is a group that raises for effective altruist causes among professional poker players. Professional poker players are like really, really kind of clear on effective altruism and like why it is that some of these arguments make sense and why it is that you should care about tail risks, because they deal with probability all the time and they really understand the difference. It's $1 million on the table. So if there's a 3% chance of losing, that's still scary. Okay, so that's something that really, that first, what does 20% feel like? And the answer is like, if you do things that involve probability frequently, you will get a really good, feeling for that. Group forecasting. So I don't know, Avi, is there any chance that you actually did the almond game that I sent you? No.
No, we didn't get a chance.
It's fine. It's a cool thing. I feel free to do it or not do it. I think it's interesting, and I had a lot of fun when I did it. When I've done it with people, I've had a lot of fun. But part of the practice there is interacting with other people and figuring out how well calibrated they are. There are people, I will say, I think that this is like a 1 in 10 chance. And they'll say, I'm nearly certain that this is going to happen. And I will say, okay, I now think that there's a 9 in 10 chance, and I want to know why they think that, because I just changed their mind just on the basis of them saying that they're really, really sure. There aren't very many people like that, but there are people who, like, I will immediately say, like, if they're certain about this, then I should be pretty confident as well. Most people, when they say they're certain about things, I actually am much less likely to pay any attention to their opinion, because when somebody says there's a 0% chance that Trump will win the 2020 election, that means they're bad at forecasting. If you go back to the, I asked you for the 100% confidence interval, and I think that this is useful because it makes you think about how certain you have to be about something to say that you're certain. So if you take the 100% confidence interval for how old I am, if that was not, say below 20 to above 70, then you're confused about what 100% confidence interval is. There should be actually no way for you to be wrong. The number that I would be comfortable giving for a 100% confidence interval for anybody's age at all is somewhere between 0 maybe, though depending on the situation, I might want to go to a negative number because maybe they haven't been born yet. To, obviously if I see somebody that's not the case, to, like 100, unless like I think that they might actually be like older than 20 or 30, in which case it should probably be closer to 150, because like you need to be certain that it can't happen. We were given an exercise to elicit from people their 50%, 95%, and 100% confidence intervals for how long it would take them to get to school when I was in grad school, how long it would take them to get to school tomorrow. And people gave answers like, oh, my 100% confidence interval is between 15 minutes and an hour. And your response is, it's never, ever, ever possible to take you more. Like you couldn't, I don't know, get in a car accident and need to go to the hospital and it takes more than an hour. Because like if that could happen, right? Okay, so I want to talk about incorporating other people's opinions. The way that you need to do that involves actually practicing and interacting with them and understanding how they think about things and where it is that they're getting their information. I think that this is why in the title slide, I crossed out the word super. Super forecasting is a methodology that requires group forecasting and clever statistical methods for combining the assessed probability of a group of people to get a better estimate than any one of them individually. That's not what any of you are going to be doing unless you want to actually participate in Good Judgement Open or like do this professionally. That's not what we're talking about here. But you still want to incorporate other people's opinions when you're doing things, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then the last thing, what changes about your belief if you're offered a bet? So this is when you bet on things. There's a big difference if somebody says, oh, like what what score would you give me 50-50 odds on for this the game tomorrow night? That's a very different thing than if they say, I will put money on it being above this or this team winning, because that's a lot of information that they just gave me, unless they're like really bad at making offers for bets, which isn't typically the case. Okay, so what kind of uncertain are we? This is an interesting one. You guys are done with your SATs, so I can't say their SAT words. Also, they're much more likely to show up on a GRE than SAT. So I flip a coin. If any of you have magic ability to predict which way a coin flips, then great. But I probably can't do this any better than you. There are people who have trained themselves to flip coins specifically on one side. There's a famous story about somebody at a Wall Street interview where they were told, I'll offer you 5-to-1 odds that the coin will be heads. The person's like, great, and he flips the coin. And he goes, okay, I'll do it again, and does it again. He goes, okay, I'll do it again. He goes, okay, great. Do you believe that this is a fair coin? And the person takes the coin and looks at it and says, yes. He goes, great, I'll offer you 5-to-1 odds. And the answer is, if you find out that things aren't happening the way that you expect them to, you should update. You should realize that there's something you're not understanding. And the answer is, yeah, there are people who train themselves to flip coins because that's what they spend their time doing. Okay. This was the last of those questions. I don't know if anybody got to it. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. But why am I going to give a better answer about that than you? And there are a bunch of reasons, right? So epistemic uncertainty is the opposite of aleatory uncertainty. So aleatory uncertainty, alea is the, I believe, Greek word for a die, like, the kind that you roll. Some things are like uncertain like that, and some things are epistemic. You could learn something or find out something to make yourself less uncertain. When I ask, when will a SpaceX Starship land successfully, I'm not intrinsically better at forecasting, but I'm probably better calibrated than most of you. I've looked at data, like I actually went and looked at what the success rate in the past was. I kind of played around with numbers a little bit and built a little model. And then I had a conversation with a bunch of other forecasters. Metaculus has kind of weekly or so discussions on their Discord. It's public if anybody wanted to go on that, where a bunch of people who are really very good at forecasting discuss one of the questions and try and come up with their best guess. So let's do that. Before that, right, if you wanted to actually get some practice, Metaculus and Good Judgement Open, great places to just go and spend some time. I will strongly recommend, I think I say this later, but I recommend doing things that you'll get fast feedback on. And for real, you want to like actually know things. And I actually think that this is one of those really basic skills where if you ask somebody like, oh, did you think about how you're going to do the project you were just assigned? And they say, no, I'm just going to like show up and wing it. You have a presentation. Oh, have you done any research? No, I'm just going to like make stuff up and hope it goes well. Like that's a dumb thing to do. And in the same way, like if you have a project that you're thinking about, not taking the time to say like, hey, how likely is it that this like really pays off? And the answer does not need to be really high. So when I started working with One Day Sooner, somebody said like, oh, do you think that challenge trials will happen? And I said, maybe like 60% sure that they'll happen at some point. And they'll say, oh, so you're not sure. And the answer is no, you don't need to be sure to do a project. There's a famous thing about how entrepreneurs have to be overconfident because otherwise they wouldn't start their companies. And it's not actually true. Entrepreneurs tend to be pretty well calibrated. They tend to say that they're super confident because that's what you're supposed to do when you're starting a company, because you can't say, yeah, I think there's like a 1 in 10 chance that this makes it, and you know, it's a decent chance that somebody else like does it better and we end up losing all of our money. But they probably have a pretty good idea about what those odds actually are. Okay, so how do you do it? This is kind of a really basic set of steps that you should take. Right, you kind of think about what number you would put on it, and then you figure out what information might actually change your mind. Value of information is a really interesting formulation in economics and decision theory that like actually quantifies how it is that you would decide how valuable information is for you. If the question is which flavor of ice cream I should get, you don't want to spend a huge amount of time. If the question is, you know, should I spend the next 5 years of my life building a company, you probably want to do a lot of research and figure out what it is that you're doing. So when I say for important questions, actually do that, I mean like, you know, for 5 minutes, spend time writing down all the things you can think of that would give you answers, like give you information. Who would you talk to? All of those things. Sometimes the answer is there's a bunch of information, but like it would actually take a you know, large scale multi-month project to get the information together in a way that would be helpful. You don't need to do that, but you should at least have thought of what it is. Talking through the question with a friend. This is just the general, there's in programming, I believe people call it rubber duckying. You put a little rubber ducky on top of your computer and you talk to the rubber ducky. That's not actually as helpful as talking to a person. Like just saying it verbally does help. Talking with another person who can say, wait, no, that didn't make sense is even more helpful. And then do group forecasting. For really important questions, you may want to do this anonymously. So if you ask like, what do you think the odds are that my company will succeed? You probably don't want to ask all of your good friends to tell you to your face because they may not be comfortable doing so. But you probably want to know the answer. I do know one person who actually paid somebody else $50 to go around to a bunch of their mutual friends and ask them for, like, tell them what they were doing and ask them for an estimate of how likely this person was to succeed at something so that they got unbiased opinions from people that they know, where like there wasn't that kind of like they have to tell you. It's a clever idea. And then you need to get feedback on all of this to be able to like figure out if you did this well. And that's critical. So if you want to, you know, like you should all check that your confidence interval that you hopefully wrote down at the beginning, and like see like if you said that you thought that I was 20 to 25, then you're doing this badly because you saw already that I was supposed to have gone to grad school and I have several kids. But like you should have some idea that like, yeah, that should have been like somewhere near your 50% confidence interval. Okay, now I want to talk through this prediction because I think that it's an interesting example that I did recently that thankfully hasn't resolved yet. So if people saw a bunch of things went wrong with the SpaceX Starship, and they keep on blowing up. And the question is like, when will it actually land and like actually do this well? And so they put in all the details. And when you're predicting a question like this, the details can really matter. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because in this case, I think they did a pretty good job like defining this in a way that just means like it actually succeeds and doesn't blow up. I looked at some information. If you look at the F9, the Falcon 9, how long did it take them before they got the booster to land? And the answer was, ooh, it took them a bunch of times. They didn't even try a bunch of the times. Like, this took a while. You say, so should we expect it to take the same number of attempts for this, for this? And then you need to dig a little bit deeper and you need to say like, well, how close are they so far? Like, what are they up to? What's happening with the system that it's failing? Like, how close are they to getting this to work? And that's a really subjective call. Then you need to know when the flight is going to happen, because you don't want to predict that there's a 50% chance of it happening next week if it's not going to launch for another month. You guys probably have not spent a bunch of time looking into this, but it's probably going to be launching like early this week sometime. So if it succeeds, it's going to succeed pretty soon, which is kind of what this indicates. This is you might not be able to see. Can you see my cursor? So the line here is my estimate, and then the line here is the community estimate, where they think that they also looked at this less recently than I did, where I just looked at when it is that they've announced it's sitting on the launch pad. There's some chance that it gets delayed. Like, I don't think that it's certain that it'll happen like right then, but it's going to happen pretty soon. They're going to launch it. This isn't whether it lands. This is just whether they launch it. I wanted to look at what it is other people think, right? It's kind of important. How likely is it that that the one that happens this week actually works? And people on this actual betting market tried to guess this. And there's not a huge amount of money on this, but there's $6,000 has been bet on this. It's not it's not nothing. And they think that there's about a 43% chance that this one will launch successfully. So I put together my actual estimate about when it is that I think it'll happen. I think it's really pretty likely that it'll happen soon. And if it doesn't happen, like very soon, then that's probably going to be like the next launch. They're launching, by the way, like every month. They're producing rockets every month. They're launching, like they've been on a really, really fast pace. So I think that if they don't succeed this time, they're very likely to succeed next time. And if they don't succeed next time, they're still more likely to do it like sooner rather than later. Fine. So that was kind of my process for that question. I don't know how useful it is to kind of walk through what information I had for that particular question, but I thought that it would at least be worth a shot. It's been half an hour, and I think that you guys might have questions on some of this. So I'm happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. I'm going to hit stop record.